I would describe success as just knowing that I can go out and make my living doing this. It really takes a long time to reach that point. I mean, you might be lucky in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years, that type of thing with having a bull market. It doesn't take brains to make money in a bull market. It's a lot of work. I think people far underestimate just how much preparation and homework every single night. It still takes me, after all these years. If I want to play the game seriously, it's a lot of preparation and homework, and I could just as easily be, riding my horses or, going out doing other things with friends. And so you have to have that total burning desire, that passion to give up everything else. I've always been one of those people that I leap and then look, and many times I suffered the consequences of that. But it also opened a lot of doors for me and created a lot of opportunities. So I am totally realistic about my makeup. It leads to a lot of volatility. It leads to a lot of stress. And then it's just coming down to, do you have the creative ways to manage that stress? Some people need validation from external sources. In a performance-oriented discipline, you don't need the validation from outside sources. You know when you have to find some way or metrics to be accountable aside from just being accountable to yourself. Because honestly, I just don't think that works. We cheat. I cheat. I cheat, That's how we learn. You have to take our errors and our mistakes and say, okay, why am I doing this, and what can I learn from it? Maybe I'm just trying to trade too many hours or too many positions or maybe I simply don't have the attention and focus that I used to have as a 22-year-old. I don't know.
Before we head into this week's podcast, a quick thank you to our long-term podcast partner, the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, who provide outstanding educational services and support services for people across the world of trading. Amongst their many outstanding services, the STA offer their brilliant home study course in technical analysis. This course is offered to listeners of the AlphaMind podcast at a discount. You can find out more about this discount by going to our website, alpha-mind.net. The home study course has been put together by many of the world's leading technical analysts exclusively for the Society of Technical Analysts and takes you into a far deeper understanding of what technical analysis is and how to apply it effectively. Now, on with this week's podcast. We were delighted once again to welcome back Linda Raschke to be a guest for a second time on the AlphaMind podcast. Now for this episode we had prepared a series of questions for Linda, which she read through to prepare for today's podcast. Then somewhat annoyingly for her, we went somewhere completely different, asking her thoughts on the topic of success and how much does she feel it's related to the quality of your relationship with yourself in relation to trading. Now this new question threw out Linda somewhat at the start of this podcast, and you can hear a little bit of her frustration at the beginning. But this podcast evolved into an excellent podcast with so many great points brought up by Linda, so many thoughts and reflections, which really form a treasure trove of insights, as you would have heard some of them at the excerpts at the beginning of this podcast. So do stay with this podcast right the way through, and we promise you will be extremely satisfied. Here we go.
It was kind of interesting because you threw out some things last minute, of course, thank you. So I can't write down my little cheat list and research all this crap. But, it had very much to do with a little cheeky phrase there. And I'm like, is he speaking to me in British speak? Nature of our relationship with ourselves in relationship to trading. Okay, so first of all, because I'm a peon trader, I can only deal with half of that at the time. So it either has to be relationship with ourselves or ourselves relationship to trading, okay? But after a trading day, you want to jumble everything together in my brain.
Well, listen, we're going to go straight in because it feels like we started now. So we'll add the introduction on after, But it's great. Yeah, I guess, it's a question that I've, with the model that we use, and I've done a lot of work with, I'll just go into it straight. Years ago, I did a course in a particular form of psychotherapy. And as I'm in it, I'm like, wow, they're talking about traders here. And of course they weren't. But I'm like, this philosophy, this model looks at the idea that, we have a relationship with the outside world, everything outside of us, which is the markets, other people in the markets, other people in our world, and that relationship, what happens out there affects us, and we're trying to read that and interpret it, and then we're trying to engage with it to find opportunities. And whilst we're doing that, it's affecting us, and we also have a relationship with ourselves. And that relationship is one of trust, hopefully, but also one where we can turn in on ourselves and start spiraling and getting angry with ourselves and frustrated with ourselves. And that's where, when we do that, we start having self-doubt, we start losing self-belief, our confidence suffers, and then we start making bad decisions, we start second-guessing ourselves. We start doing all that sort of stuff, the self stuff, and we get engaged in that crazy self-talk inside our head. And then that's kind of how we're wired a little bit. How we respond to that, how we cope with that, how we manage with that is so important to kind of what comes next. And, we talk about that, Mark. You might have a view on that as well. And we come from a slightly different angle. Mark likes to focus on doing body management for that. But I focus a little bit more on, trying to understand that and sort of bring internal balance through trying to understand what you're doing in the markets and how that's screwing you up. And realizing how that's affected you. And Mark does the same, but we both approach it from slightly different angles. Mark, maybe you've got your perspective on it as well.
Well, I think this word presence sort of sums it up for me. That if you can be present to where you are, then you're not going to be focused too much on these distractions that are within self, these demons that turn up to make you doubt and suffer. I think huge suffering comes from the way we pay attention to thoughts, particularly when we're feeling a bit fragile and vulnerable. Trying to make money in the world of trading. There's lots of things that could trigger us into these dark places. And I think that having a practice that develops a presence in a sustainable way allows you to be far less focused on these distractions. And I think, that's my answer to that question. Learn about presence, get presence, because, we're doing some work where we're looking at people like Roger Federer. And Roger Federer, the fantastic tennis player and legend, really, has a fire and ice philosophy. That he has the fire in his belly for his competitive, drive. But he also talks about the ice in his veins, to be cool, calm, and collected with composure. And you see that, he embodies that. When you see him play, he is the coolest cucumber because he pays attention to the ice, where most of the competitors against him are paying attention to the fire. And so the question of having balance and having a philosophy of managing self so that you have ice in your veins, so that you have that element of presence, because that essentially is what is developing. And I suppose there is a question I'm going to throw at you, Linda, at this stage, which is, so what would Linda do in terms of what sets you up in terms of having ice in your veins? What is your...
So, I alluded to that I might see things slightly differently than perhaps both of you, because where I came from, for example, on the exchange floors, and I said, I have so many colleagues that are, CTAs, hedge fund managers, this arena of professional sports and so forth. I think you have to have confidence and, know your game on the positive self-talk to get to that level in the first place. Okay. So I'm not in that space, perhaps dealing where perhaps you are, perhaps you're not, but coaching people who are not there yet. You see? And there's a big difference there, because in my humble opinion, because I see so much of this, you guys know as well as anybody, only 5% are going to make it, period. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's a rock band, doesn't matter if it's a golfer, doesn't matter if you're a concert pianist, doesn't matter if it's a trader. Okay? You got, a million trader wannabes out there, 5% are going to make it. And the ones who are most likely to make it already have that sense of self, already have that confidence, already have some handle on their emotional control. Okay? I can talk about my own experiences only, but I'm also giving you feedback as to, in my arena, who I've seen make it and have that staying power and who doesn't. Okay? And it is true to some degree that perhaps anybody could be coached enough that they could get there, And if you look at, for example, the turtle traders, Richard Dennis and Bill Eckert, okay? Bill Eckert, by the way, was the genius of the two. Genius with statistics. I can go back on my side of the states and look at these people like Blair Hull, William Eckert, people throughout history. A strong affinity for poker, blackjack, statistics, gambling. And these are the people in my arena who I've seen be very, very successful. Okay, so they already had that composure. They already had that bent on statistics, modeling these types of structures that allow us to remove the emotions from things. Okay, because more often than not, the emotions are going to pop up when you don't have the protection of, proper risk management structures, proper models, all this kind of stuff. And you're just winging it as a macro trader or discretionary trader or whatever. That's not going to, be sustainable in the long run. But back to what I was talking about with Richard Dennis and Bill Eckert's original experiment years ago. Yes, they took a group of traders or potential traders, and yes, they turned them into this very profitable group at the time. But they were also incredibly selective as to who they took for their program, and specifically looking for those traders with an affinity towards game theory. Huge difference there, because most people don't have a grasp of this game theory type of concepts, okay? And so I just wanted to say that there are individuals out there, being the Federers of the world, the Lang pianists of the world, whoever's, that are going to have much higher odds of, being successful in this profession, which is challenging for sure. So, but right off the bat, I think that, you need to also look at, in your guys' experience, who are those top traders now that you may or may not have worked off, but you see more than I do. And I do think it's different if you're trading for an institution. Huge difference, versus the pressure of managing money, having performance-oriented, pressures on you. And even though you might have that initial confidence that allows you to succeed in this field, okay, and a certain tenacity and a certain perseverance and all this kind of stuff, I also get it that there's crap that can happen along the way. That's what my book was all about. How do you find that internal fortitude to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, And so you've got your conviction in your own judgment. You have to have that. If you don't have that conviction in your own judgment and approach and methodology, you're not even halfway there. And that takes a long, long time and a lot of research. And so from what I've seen, a lot of the very successful people have had success elsewhere in their life earlier on in their childhood. Perhaps they've been a professional football player, a professional tennis player. Toby Crable was a professional tennis player. There's another person that's very bent towards the statistics and the modeling and understanding the big numbers game. It's not about one bet, or about your ego in calling the market direction. You have to learn to frame things out in terms of statistical arbitrage. And if I do this 100 times, then I'll have a positive expectation, blah, blah, blah. And once again, there's outliers that happen overnight and stuff, but then you also have to have the fortitude to say, okay, I'm just going to manage this the best I can. So myself, I'll talk more about myself. I don't think of myself as an extremely emotional person. I'd be perfectly happy just sitting in front of my screen 5 days a week. I mean, I'm not a very social person, Yeah. I've always worked very, very, very hard, paying my own way, through school, through this, that. And so that in and of itself gives you a high degree of confidence that you're self-sufficient, number one. You don't really need to rely on external variables for your own well-being. You're self-sufficient in that regards. And also, growing up, I mentioned I was a pianist initially, and I practiced like 6 hours a day. So you develop that concentration and that focus. Once again, it's not a very emotional enterprise there. It's very technical and detail-oriented and so forth. So I think those types of things for me increased my own resiliency. And I think also it's helpful for people if they recognize that if they have had adverse experiences earlier in their childhood, midlife, whatever the case may be, but before they're age 22, that also builds up resiliency that might be called upon at a later date and time, perhaps if you are experiencing adverse things in the marketplace. Because it's just a numbers game. 50% of the time, you might only be right 33% of the time if you're a trend follower. So you have to accept the given and the modeling. And for sure, we're in a very remarkable time right now. I'm sure a lot of people out there think of the past 5 years. You can do no wrong, but this particular type of environment that we're in is something that most people in my career, I've been doing this almost 45 years, have never, they don't really see this strength of this kind of trendiness. I mean, perhaps in the late 90s, hello, Bunny, my dog wants to say hello. Perhaps there have been periods, but not so sustainable as we have had from this gross, we're still seeing the fallout from this expansion in the monetary base and a billion other reasons. But it's not going to be like that forever. So adaptability, the environments change, do your models account for that? I try to do my modeling so that it's very durable and robust, so my stats for the things that I do model are the same nowadays as they were 30 years ago. I'm going to get the same stats if I model over like 3 months of data, 6 months of data, 3 years of data. I'll pretty much end up with a very similar type of profile. And, again, I hate throwing names out there, but this is something I was talking about today because I got the feeling that a lot of people didn't really know how to do proper modeling, and testing. But in the early 80s, that's when we had this explosion in system development. And that's when you had Toby Crabell doing his range expansion stuff, which was a holding time of under 24 hours. Monroe Trout adapted very similar style. He was a little bit later on in time. Larry Williams popularized all kinds of like in one day, out the next type of day. And so this was an early foundation in the futures markets, which, serves as a base for, modeling. Can we take these same models of price behavior and then see how they behave on the gold, behave on the crude, behave on, other markets? Is a market, or does it have its own subtle nuances? And so this was all through the 80s, and I did a lot of that and was fortunate in having, people be there to help do the research for me. And then in the 90s, of course, we saw that progress in a lot of the equity. You are just going to be a little nudge.
Just for clarity, Linda's now playing with her dog. You're listening on the audio, okay?
We gotta have our humor, right? See, you asked how I survived, now you know. Humor and animals, oh my God. What a day. All right, so I've been blabbing here, but that gives you a little bit more insight as to why, in my opinion, there's always going to be just a very small percentage of people that are going to make it. Do they have a propensity in the first place, a temperament type of variable that's going to make it much easier for them to, reach success and stay there? It is true. I must have gotten whacked 5 billion times. Steve read my book, and there's all kinds of crap that happens in this business, but that's why you're in this business. It's called risk. You assume that you are in an environment that's highly risky and highly stressful. That's a given before you even walk into that ring, And if you can't deal with that, you are just in the wrong business. It doesn't mean that you can't be in the financial markets, perhaps serving as an analyst or helping people do quantitative modeling or things like that. But, I can look back my entire life, and I've always been one of those people that I leap and then look, and many times I suffered the consequences of that. I got a very thick skin, but it also opened a lot of doors for me and created a lot of opportunities. So I am totally realistic about my makeup, and it leads to a lot of volatility. It leads to a lot of stress. And then it's just coming down to, do you have the creative ways to manage that stress? So, for me, humor, right? Humor, animals, physical exercise, all the health things that they say,
I find it interesting with your story, because you are right. It's for us, this relationship with yourself is such a key element of, conversations we have with people. And we do see actually, these same conversations with very senior traders, because there's a different level of expectations. They are playing at a very different level. And even they want to talk about these things, that the pressure they feel, they worry about the damage to their reputation, the hit to the reputation, the pressure to perform and produce results, and that feeling of being inadequate often, or letting themselves down if they don't achieve it. So we do see this as often a really challenging part of being a trader. I mean, it's a challenging part of any performance. I was just listening to a podcast this weekend on golf, and and it was about, and you'll probably sort of recognise it, Mark. I think they call it swing thoughts. The thoughts that come into your head as you're about to swing, that completely disrupt the micro movements of the swing and the way it goes. So it was all about, and I was listening to them, and I'm thinking, that's often about people's relationship with themselves again. The more comfortable they are, the less thought they have, and the more they'll just play the shot. But
whilst you're on that, the hack around that is to sing to yourself whilst you're playing golf.
Yeah.
People sing some sort of music piece whilst they're playing to be a rhythm for what they're about to do.
And they said something really interesting.
I always used a lot in golf, apparently. I mean, it's crazy.
They said in terms of the brain, whilst a swing can take a second or two, that's a lifetime for the brain, and it can have so many thoughts in that sort of second or so.
So there are lots of tools out there, and I mean, I've used them just to play around with them, but I used them 30 years ago, so I can instantly, your brain waves, the alpha state, the theta state, these deep, things like that. There used to be a little machine that you can still find online today. I don't know why they don't make more of them now, but it's like a sound and light machine with the binaural beats, and the flashing LED lights. And it can help you instantly, slow down those brain waves and ramp you down into that quote zone. And so after you've experienced this enough, be it meditation, for example, can get you there if you are experienced and have practiced that, because you can't just start meditating and teach yourself to get down into that state. It takes a lot of practice and work. But then you can instantly go there faster. And so there's lots of little hacks like that. I mentioned in my book, I used to have a float tank, and you could go in, it's like sensory deprivation. And, I had been in high school and my parents were having this like horrendous divorce. I mean, it's like, and I'm the oldest child, and my daughter, my sister had like zillion, neurological dysfunctions. It was like, so I had a lot of freedom, and I, for whatever reason, felt like I was in part responsible for, the family and stuff. So I had started going to a hypnotherapist at the behest of my friend who was actually going for weight loss. And so she taught me, and it's actually very teachable, and you can learn it really in 2 or 3 days, how to hypnotize yourself, and that's just bringing yourself down, I am cool, calm, collected, and just repeat that over and over. So that could be one way. You mentioned music, especially like the chill out music. I just love, Ibiza. I want to move to Ibiza. I've never even been there, but the music just makes me want to go get naked on the beach, and, so physical exercise, like that's why I like going out and hitting the tennis ball, is because like an hour of just bam, 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 you can the mind just shuts off, and the body takes over. And then same thing with the horses. I ride dressage, so you're basically sitting there trying to pretend like you're not doing anything. And the horse is doing all the work. But it's really as if you were on the floor with a dance partner doing ballroom dancing, the tango, just the subtle little gestures and cueing back and forth. And so that's how it is with a horse. And so you have to be totally in the moment and then listening for that instant feedback that you can then transfer that energy some other way. And so that's why I love all these analogies with sports, and performance sports, especially that are individual sports as opposed to like a team sport, like field hockey or something. But, if you're not an athlete, I think you can get the same thing, gardening, just losing yourself in the dirt, in other words, you're doing something.
We'll return to the podcast in a second. What are you doing to improve yourself as a trader? At AlphaMind, we work with traders from across the markets, both professional and retail, and trading businesses to help people improve their performance. A focus on developing performance is one of the few areas that is very, I suppose you could say, under-practiced in an industry that is really a performance industry, and where developing key aspects, key behaviors, key mindsets can have a huge impact on how you work, how you perform, how you manage risk, how you increase size, how you maintain your sense of self in the face of uncertainty. Do feel free to check out our services as performance coaches. Go to our website, alpha-mind.net, to know more, or email us info@alpha-mind.net. Now back to the podcast. You're engaged in self-care. I mean, this is what we would call self-care, the sort of get out the moment, get out the market, try and forget what happened, try and give your brain somewhere else to go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. I'm also really interested in something you said before. So you talked about, and this is where I think a lot of people struggle as well, confidence in their process or their system or their method or their approach.
Oh God, it's so important. So you get,
and how much, that brings trust in yourself, what you're doing. And I always recall something you said in our first conversation, and I can't remember whether it was in the conversation or whether it was when we went offline afterwards. And it was along the line of, it was almost like whenever the market went against you or you lost some money, you had drawdowns, you always had a confidence that you were going to make the money back. It didn't matter. It wasn't it wasn't soul destroying. That you had a process and a way of working that meant it's going to move back up from bottom left to top right.
But it's all about reframing it. See, you have to take what happened and you have to reframe it in your head. And, for example, like let's say I got caught in something ugly, which happened a lot. I have to say, okay, I'm going to figure out how to be on the right side of this. I don't want this to happen a 10th time. I want to figure out how to be on the right side of this, So you have to take that error and then convert. You have to figure out how to convert. I mean, it could be, you could just be trading sloppy, and maybe you're just doing your lowest size, because I find that most often people tend to get really sloppy if they are not trading a proper bet size, because it doesn't hurt to lose, right?
Yeah.
So, but you could equally come and reframe that and say, okay, I'm keeping a toe in the water and I'm learning these lessons now. If you're a newer trader, okay, I'm learning these lessons now so that I can correct them, so that I'll be there when I can triple my size and increase my leverage, and I'll have all these other little things ironed out, so it's serving a purpose. And are you going to take that and sulk and feel like, you beat up on yourself, or are you going to take it and say, okay, I'm going to learn from this. Most of my life, what motivated me was in part spite and anger, when I was growing up and my dad, split and took all the money, left me in college, like just starting off with no way to pay for anything, And I remember he had always wanted to be successful in the markets. He was, a small-time real estate developer, but I'd be like, I'll show you. I'm going to be successful, and I don't need you to help me out, And, there's been lots of people like that in my life where they'd be whining, and I'll be like, well, I'll show you, what are you whining about? Just make something happen, you can make it happen. So it's really about how you, reframe it.
That for me is the relationship you have with yourself. It's almost like, okay, I'm going to show them. We're going to show them. I mean, you had a horrendous start. You had that great big. I wasn't a drawdown, was it? You had in your first role where you had to pay the money back.
Oh yeah, you mean where I sold straddles after trading for a year and got caught in a takeover stock, and it took me 5 years to pay that back. Yeah, that was pretty miserable. It was pretty hard to come up with anything positive to say about that period, except that it kept me in the business.
Yeah, but you fought back though. I mean, there must have been something about that resilience you've got within you, that fight within you.
You know what? It was just miserable. I'm sorry, Steve. It wasn't even fighting back. It was just miserable. I mean,
you didn't walk away. You didn't walk away. Could you have walked away?
Well, I'd have to file bankruptcy.
Yeah, you could have. I mean, how old were you?
I was 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the thing that time period served for me was that I stayed in the business and everybody around me was in the business. I didn't really have any outside friends, and so it's just that life, eat, breathe, sleep, trading, in a professional format, because we had exchange memberships, on the floor. So it's different than a retail space nowadays. At least there was some modicum of an edge back in those days, without having to do the statistical modeling. But it wasn't a very fun time.
Okay. I'm going to ask Mark to come in now, and because he comes in usually with a different angle, and it'll be interesting to hear what he's going to come in with. You need to unmute though, Mark. That's the one thing you do need to do.
I already tried that trick. It doesn't work.
Wake up. Well, you mentioned the word success, the fact that, so few people make it. I mean, at all professional levels in sports as well as trading, of course. But I mean, trading's got its own sort of nuance. From your perspective, what does real success look like in trading? I mean, it's not just surely bottom line. Is there something more that, if you look back to some of the people that you've known that you'd consider to be greats, there must be something more that...
I think that I would describe success as just knowing that I can go out and make my living doing this. It really takes a long time to reach that point. I mean, you might be lucky in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years, that type of thing with having a bull market, it doesn't take brains to make money in a bull market. But truly, with that said, I would say that for my journey, for every 100 systems I tried to develop, for every 100 systems I read about, for every, chart book years of charting, for all the things that I did, I would end up walking away with maybe 1%, that I would retain. And so 99% of all of that, of the other stuff just went by the wayside. You're like, okay, tried that, didn't work. Tried that, didn't work. And so finally, when you arrive at not only a style that has an edge, but a style that fits your personality, and you feel like excited about, that's, I think, what success is that when you can really sit back and enjoy that process a little bit more without getting so frustrated. I mean, you can always get annoyed. There's a difference for me between getting annoyed with having, stuff get whipsawed. You're just doing the best job you can with your trade management, but you can get annoyed about having a noisy environment. But if you say you're frustrated, that to me implies that you were trying to make something happen, or you felt that something should happen, and you can't look at it that way. It's like cards, right? You can't control what card's going to be dealt next. You can know when the cards are hot, if you've been counting cards, and we can get annoyed, if you're just not getting any, lucky hands or stuff. But you can't really say that you're getting frustrated, because that's the game, And so I hope I'm making sense here. So back to the success. The success to me is when you understand the nature of the game enough to really enjoy playing it, all its warts and trials and tribulations and, challenges.
And was there a point, perhaps not at the beginning, but I mean, even midway during your journey, where you couldn't understand it, you found it difficult to interpret, and obviously there was a frustration that may have come with that. But I'm interested to know that if that was the case, what did you do to get out of that? Because that refers back to sort of Stephen's spiral that you talked about earlier, that you can get a little bit emotionally and mentally locked somewhere.
Well, sometimes you just have to step back. Sometimes you just have to step back and regroup. And then you start out again, and you might just be trading one contract for, 2 ticks, and then it's a win. And it's like, yes, convert, right? Just like, my favorite example, and I mentioned in the book, was Andre Agassi in the French Open, when he was down 3 match points, and then the opponent made one unforced error, and he's like pumping his fist. He's like, yes, and back in the game. Well, he wasn't back in the game. He had a long ways to go. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you just need to step back. You need to take a break. You can't keep pressing it. If you're starting to be fatigued, you're going to make errors. You're going to make unforced errors, The gal that played in the U.S. Open, she was a very talented tennis player, and she took a whole year off because mentally she was getting worn down. I think she was 26 or 27. She ultimately got beaten by Sabalenka, but she had to take a whole year off. Her dad had passed, some other things had happened, and her game, she was terrible at the last the Wimbledon or something. She got beat 6-0, 6-0. Can you imagine how humiliating that would be? Humiliating in front of national television, international television, to get beaten 6-0, 6-0. How do you come back from that? You just have to step back, regroup, go back to square one, do what you know best, and start, knocking it out again.
Yeah, my goodness, there's so many examples of failure being switched around and reframed as an opportunity to, as you say, to reset. But that requires a tenacity, that requires a process. It seems so easy to say, well, you step back and reset, but
maybe not everybody is built to have all those same resources inside of them. It's okay for some people to feel uncomfortable assuming risk. That's okay. Maybe you're not going to be happy in this profession. It's a lot of work. I think people far underestimate just how much preparation and homework every single night. It still takes me, after all these years, if I want to play the game seriously, it's a lot of preparation and homework, and I could just as easily be, riding my horses or, going out doing other things, with friends. And so you have to have that total burning desire, that passion to give up everything else. Okay, because I just see this field. It's everything else falls by the wayside. The trading has to be number one. It's not something you do part-time. It's not something you do half-heartedly. It has to be like 120% commitment day after day after day. And when you start to get burned out, that's when you step back and you regroup, get recharged again, take a vacation, very important. But you're this is your life. That's how I see it. And it's not that you have to be in front of the screen 100% of the time. I mean, perhaps you're doing a trend following system and you are, a longer time horizon, but you still need to manage your infrastructure, if you will. You still need to manage that. Okay, the connectivity is there, the computers are there, the backups there, the fail-safe over, the stops, all that kind of stuff. And and then, you can jolly well go do what you want during the day. And a lot of people have created, ways of playing this game that doesn't mean that they have to sit in front of the screen full time.
Oh, you're on mute, Stevie.
It's my turn now to...
Yes.
Do you realize you were talking and nothing was coming out?
Yeah, you thought, he's amazing how he does that. So, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about Amanda and Samova. I think I said it correct there. Because that's almost what I talk about the relationship with ourselves. For her to come back from that Wimbledon, that, like you said, was humiliating, the way she lost that final. And to come back and then get to the final of the next Open. And she performed brilliantly in that final.
She even took a set off Sabalenka, yes.
Yeah, she took her the whole way. And I just think that is what takes guts. Because for a lot of people, I can imagine, I don't want to go out there again. I don't want to put myself into that situation. That's often when I talk about the relationship with ourselves. We talk about it a lot. This thing about letting go.
You also use the word validation, that some people need validation from external sources.
Yeah.
And I say that if you're going to be that type of tennis player, if you're going to be a top trader, if you're going to be in a performance-oriented discipline, you don't need the validation from outside sources. You know when you're,
That's what she's got. She must have some sort of incredible internal engine that just lets go, moves on, and comes back. And I do hope she wins a Grand Slam, and maybe she'll win a few now. But it's almost like the comeback is the victory.
Oh my God, it was. Yeah, I mean, I hope people recognize just how challenging that must have been. But, you see these things online where there's a sprinter, the 400-meter race, and the gal trips, and she's last, right? And she picks herself up, and she accelerates, and she ends up winning the race. I'm sure you've seen that footage. Okay, There's all kinds of examples out there like that, I mean, football teams where it's coming down to the last, 3 minutes of the game, and they're down 10 points, but they still pull it out, I mean, it's just who is going to perform under pressure?
Yeah, and this is kind of where we talk about this internal engine, and I always feel that someone like you, for whatever reason, whether it was the resilience of your early life experiences, which sounded like they were tough, and you said a lot of people that this engine is there before the age of 22. It brings in a level of resilience that maybe you haven't even recognized. But, it's to keep going. Like you say, you don't need external validation. You don't need the world to tell you how great you are, or, you know it already. And that's going to help you find a way through this. Because, this is a morass, this job, a lot of the time.
Well, also, I think I can only speak for myself. One thing that I really enjoy is having a colleague or an assistant or somebody that you can be in the groove together all day, you know? And I would not be happy just sitting here by myself day after day with nobody to talk to or interact with. That's not fun. I love sharing things I see, and I love, having a colleague that equally can reciprocate. It doesn't mean that I'm doing their trades or they're doing my trades, but it's like, oh yeah, look at that, hey, that's so cool. Wow, look at how these are starting to, come into, correlate together and stuff. And so that perhaps our tennis player example had that with, a coach or some friends or whoever that, she could get back into rallying with, and really the support network. And, sometimes too, even perhaps she changes her grip or has something new psychologically, I've got a new trick in the bag, that's very helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I mean, this is again why we sort of went down this conversation is, and again, myself and Mark, we have these deep conversations, and we have them with teams as well. The team has a personality. A team can have a good relationship with itself or a bad relationship with itself. And in a way, you gave a great example there of, you work with someone else. In a way, you're a team, but you're each serving yourself. But in a way, you're each supporting each other as well. And
so you and Mark are the perfect example then of getting the fun of bouncing things back and forth.
We do actually, because we go to a lot of places and we turn up as a team, and we know when the other one's going to speak, don't we, Mark?
We have a good rapport.
Mark looks like he's dozing off there. What time is it? Sorry, guys.
We've had to do that. We've turned up in Singapore, and one day one of us has got the jet lag, and the next day the next one, and we go, Matt, you just do the whole gig today, will you?
Next time you go there, take me with you. I'll serve as a
was the place.
As a shill.
Yeah. Well, we nearly met you in Miami, didn't we? We unfortunately we couldn't quite.
I know what happened. You got sick.
Yeah.
Oh, you were sick.
Yeah, we were going to meet you that evening when we were we were doing some work over there. The same company in Miami. So
yes, that was lovely. I want to mention something, but you mentioned about this sort of the need for passion in the space, the need to be 120% engaged, and I think just the way that you're speaking to us, you can sense that level of passion. Someone said to me once when I was on my own sort of journey and I was getting excited about embracing the whole mindfulness space, and I could talk for like hours about it and get really excited about it. And this guy said to me, he says, you know what's really cool is that you light up like a Christmas tree when you talk about this stuff. I think that's exactly what you're doing, Linda, when you're engaged in this space and someone sparks a conversation like us about markets, which you are loving the journey of it, you see a joy in it, and that comes across as this tremendous energy.
Truthfully, Mark, I don't know how to talk about anything else. You're passionate about what you love because you're very knowledgeable with it.
But when people are out there thinking, well, how do I know I'm crazy in love with this sort of space? Well, it's when you start to talk about it in the way that you're talking to us, when you really get a buzz out of it. And I think when you get to that level of buzz, you start thinking, I really am excited about this. And
it's kind of funny because, I packed up my fund in 2014 and said, I've had enough. That's great. Time to step down, time to enjoy the good life, time to train the horses, all this good stuff, right? And I really did try to, diversify myself. Got very into tennis, playing on teams and stuff. And, I still compete with the horses. And I mean, I've had a lot of fun, but, it's like on the other hand, it's not the same fulfillment because, I just miss the arena here. And so lately, there's a colleague here that I correspond online with several people. We've got it was a Skype room, now it's a Teams room, and this individual's been trading for 20 years, but, still had another job and wants to, pack that up. So I'm like, okay, I have not traded the same way in the last 7 or 8 years when you have a lot on the line, meaning full-size positions, like the leverage that I used to trade with, and it's different because I don't have to trade. I never have to do anything for the rest of my life. I was very blessed, in that I was able to, do well early on, but it's not the same, because all of a sudden I was getting terribly bored. I was feeling stale. I wasn't feeling like I was growing. I'm like, I don't know how much more I can do tennis and horses and everything because my body keeps breaking down. I got to have another hip replacement on the other side now. This is called old age, I'm becoming the bionic woman, I have lens replacements in my eyeballs, I got mechanical shoulder. It's like I have an artificial tendon here from ripping that from tennis, so it's, I'm like, God, what's going to happen when I just can't function anymore physically, I'm just going to shrivel up and die. So I was like, okay, I got to make a full commitment, to get back in this again. And that means, doing the homework, doing the preparation, I put my trade sheet out there for 2 or 3 other people, in our little Teams room. We all do our homework. And I made sure that everybody had to post their stuff first, and they're all good people. Like one guy's been trading for 35 years. He does something completely different, in the options and stocks, but I've known him forever and ever. And another fellow has his own fund, it's offshore, an Indian guy. I don't know why. 3 of my best friends are Indians. What? Go figure. I don't know. So, but it just seems to work because it's like you have a format by which to be accountable, okay? And I think that's really, really important. It keeps you on the level, and I think that was what was a good thing for me managing money, was that I had the type of clients who were fund of funds, okay? So they would have a large fund and allocate to 10, CTAs or other managers. This is how I started off. But they would also watch everything that you did, and then if they noticed that perhaps 6 out of their 10 traders were long gold, they might trade against that just a little bit if the whole fund was getting overly long, so that was fine. I don't care what they were doing, we only care about our own performance, but you still know that somebody's watching what you're doing every single day. I didn't even know what my P&L was at the end of the day. I didn't want to know, but they did, and so you have to find some way or metrics to be accountable aside from just being accountable to yourself. Because honestly, I just don't think that works. We cheat. I cheat, okay? I cheat, So I can get away with stuff, maybe only putting on like half-size position, or maybe, scaling out too early, or I don't even like scaling in or scaling out, I just I'm all in, all out. That's my style. But I think that you have to find, a colleague. It could be a coach, a trading coach. That serves a wonderful purpose, that you are monitoring somebody else's results. That is probably more likely to keep them accountable.
We will return to this podcast shortly. Just a quick reminder about our podcast sponsor, the Society of Technical Analysts, a brilliant organisation which help traders and analysts from across the spectrum of markets. They have many fantastic programs, including the new Technical to Trading System program. Also, do check out their brilliant home study course, and AlphaMind listeners can get a discount on that. Just go to our website, alpha-mind.net, to find out more about that. You can find out more about the Society of Technical Analysts by going to their website, technicalanalysts.com. Now back to the podcast. Yeah, we do see that. I mean, I don't monitor results because I'm not an outcome focused. I sort of how they do and what's your behaviours, what is it you want to talk about this week, what's going on. But like I walked into someone today, first thing this morning in the fund, and he says, I've been thinking about you, what I'm going to say to you. It's been a tough period, and he was almost like apologising. I said, well, I'm not here for you to apologise to, but what's the internal conversation going on with you that's making you? This is where I kind of come back to this. We always have this internal conversation. We hold ourselves to account. I think you gave a good example. You cheat. I love that.
That's the point of keeping statistics.
You're cheating yourself, but you're cheating.
It is. Sometimes it's like, I'm just going to close everything out this afternoon. I'm tired, Yeah. We're close everything out. I got to put everything all back on again. I didn't really need to do that,
See, well, I love that, because it must be people sitting here thinking, I've been doing this a few years, and Linda's been doing this 40 years, is it? 40? More than 40 years?
Going on 45.
44 years. She's a legend.
I look like I'm 16, right?
You look good. She's a legend. Okay. All right. She needs a new hip, but she's still a legend. Okay. All right. And she's doing the same things as me. And I think that's going to make a lot of people feel good about themselves.
Well, I always tell everybody, I've made every mistake there is to make, and I've probably made it 10 times more than they have, Yeah. And it's that's how we learn, that's you have to take our errors and our mistakes and say, okay, what am I, why am I doing this, and what can I learn from it? Maybe I'm just, trying to trade too many hours or too many positions, or maybe I simply don't have the attention and focus that I used to have as a 22-year-old. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting dementia, Steve.
Yeah, we want to be on the other side of you when that happens. But listen, what's great is I'm human. That's it. We're all human. We can't be perfect. We can't get out at the top and get in at the bottom. It's just impossible. It's not a game of perfect, which is a golf book. Okay, Bob Rotello's book. It's not a game of perfect trading.
That's something that, like, when we do our system development or testing or modeling, whatever you want to call it, if you come up with a strategy and you can do it on the computer, okay, as an individual trading that system, it used to be, of course, it's a little bit different nowadays because of, the technology that we have and everything else, but it used to be that you would be doing excellent if you could capture 80% of the system's profits. Why? Because you're going to make an error. There's going to be partial fills. There might be some little blip. It's like we can model things, and if you're capturing 80% of that, that's excellent. Okay?
Yeah.
And then you have to have some type of benchmark. If I'm only capturing 60% of that, then something's wrong. Then there's too much slippage in the system. There's a latency. There's, the way that the management's being handled. There could be a zillion different things, but you have to have a benchmark, and then it has to be a realistic benchmark. So let me give you a different example that perhaps a newer trader could relate to. If you take a swing, and let's say that we're just looking at hourly charts, and let's say we look at an hourly swing up in the euro currency, or perhaps let's just make it the S&Ps, okay? An hourly swing up in the S&Ps, the average length of line is maybe, say, it used to be 60 handles, right? That happens in 20 minutes these days. So if you can capture 1/3 of that swing, okay, that's your benchmark. You're not trading correctly if you're only capturing 10% of that swing. Now, if you're trading on a 5-minute chart, fine. Your swing, your line might be smaller, but you need to be capturing at least 1/3 of that. Same thing if you're a daily swing trader. Your minimum is that you need to capture 1/3 of that. And if you're not doing that, you're exiting too soon for whatever reason, or you're not managing it correctly, or perhaps you're initiating too late. There could be a host of reasons. But you have to have some benchmark by which to measure yourself. And then if you can take out 2/3 of that swing, then you pat yourself on the back and say, hey, good job, well done. Let me see if I can do that 80% of the time. But you're not going to do it more than that. You'll be lucky to do it even half the time that you can take out 2/3 of a swing. Because it's very difficult. People don't realize the noise levels in the market. And, yes, you could say you're going to trail a stop. That's fine. But then when it does take you out, you'll have an X amount of give back. And so, just set a little benchmark for yourself and, see how you do each day.
Mark, you got anything you want to sort of think about as we sort of start to bring...
I'll just go back to my point saying, look, it's when you're passionate about something, it comes across in a way that's very difficult to explain. And that makes you engaging. When you're engaging in this space, people listen to you, and you build networks easily. People want to listen. They want more. And I think, Linda, your reputation has been built. I think your own energy has built that wonderful reputation that you have in the space. Obviously, one of the world's most foremost traders, been in the wizard books, etc. But there's more to it. It's you bring a presence to the space that has an energy that it's just a pleasure to listen to. It's just a pleasure. You probably noticed we just let you just go for it earlier on because it was just so nice to just sit and listen. For those who are out there on these journeys, it's difficult. Not many people make it. But to replay this episode and listen to the detail, because there's a lot of lessons in here.
Well, thank you both. I really enjoyed talking with both of you guys too.
Thank you for joining us this week. We do hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to know any more about AlphaMind and our services, please do check us out, alpha-mind.net. Thank you to our podcast sponsor, the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA. You can check them out at technicalanalysts.com. And as a reminder, listeners to this podcast can obtain a small discount on their brilliant home study course. You can find out more about that on our website, alpha-mind.net. We look forward to you joining us for future episodes, or do feel free to check out our past back catalogue of episodes on the AlphaMindPodcast.com. Have a good week.